Today's a special day for me because I get to talk to somebody whose work I not only admire, but I consider a friend. So today, our guest is Nocona Burgess, who is certainly a household name, I think, in New Mexico, certainly in Santa Fe. And before we begin, Nocona, I'm going to read a little bit of your bio. I can't imagine there aren't people who don't know your work already, but I want, before we begin our conversation, I want people to know who you are. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay. So, for those of you who don't know Nocona, I'm reading directly from his website because it's so eloquent and it's so perfect. But Nocona Burgess presents strikingly modern depictions of indigenous men and women from various tribal nations of North America. His paintings mix careful research, firsthand knowledge, and raw passion. That's one of the best things about your paintings, Nocona. It says here that you explore the cultural context, life story, and identity of each sitter. You're a
Right.
member of the Comanche Nation of Oklahoma, the son of a former tribal chief, and the great great grandson of one of the most revered Native American leaders, Chief Quanah Parker. Um, there's a lot more. Folks can find that on the website, but those are all really fascinating facts. But I'm curious to know, and you and I talked about this a little bit at Indian Market, how did painting and art become your personal passion?
Well, I always kind of grew up around art. As in native families, there's always art around, whether you're considered an artist or not. I mean, like my dad's grandmother who raised him, my great grandmother, she was blind and she did beadwork. And so she was able to separate the colors with pill jars. So different size pill jars. And she would use like a cafeteria tray and put the different colors in each section. And so she could see it in her head and she made it. And I still have some medallions that she had made. And so she was a bead worker. My mom's mom was a quilt maker, always made like quilts. And she kind of got famous or notoriety from like her little Indian men and women quilts, where it's kind of like outlines of men with braids and women and like little dresses. So these little patterns on these quilts in Oklahoma. And then my grandfather um, was a painter. He was an artist. He was, and so he just kind of did paintings here and there. And then my dad's an artist. Even though he kind of went to the administration side, my dad's like super smart, two master's degrees and a PhD, but he went to the kind of the administration side. He was always kind of the principal and the dean and the president of things. But, people always asked him how come he didn't be an artist. He's like, well, I was a young father and I had mouths to feed, so he could
Right.
really roll the dice. And then my mom always says that, she wasn't an artist, but she's done little art things here and there throughout my life. So just kind of being around that, and I actually started out in school. I went to University of Oklahoma for architecture. And because, at the time, it just at 18, who do you know that's an artist? Or it was always a struggle. And so I kind of went in a different direction. And I guess over the years, kind of this beckoning to come back and do it. And so I ended up, I took a short year at IAIA, but I kind of really developed my wings at University of New Mexico under Nick Abdullah there in painting. And then I ended up finishing a BFA at the University of Science and Arts in Oklahoma. I just went back to Oklahoma for a couple of years, finished that up, and then I came immediately back. I had a little townhouse here in Santa Fe. And so I just kind of decided, I was going to paint. I was a little bit older. I probably really didn't get going until I was 28, 29. And then it just kind of went from there. And, I've always had the passion. I've always loved it. And then somewhere along the way, I've always had a big passion for history, being kind of from a historical significant family. I think it's always made me read and study. And my grandfather and my parents always encouraged me to read. So history was what I read. And then somewhere along the way, history crashed into my painting. And then, here comes, my career. So.
Well, and describe to somebody because we have a lot of listeners. We have listeners from around the world, and we're going to we will certainly provide links in this podcast right now in the notes in the show notes. There are links to Nakona's work, but it's your style is very specific. I mean, to
Right.
me, if I see a painting somewhere in town, I know that it's one of yours. So I'm curious how you personally describe your style. I mean, it's not abstract, it's not realism, but this great mix. It's a very contemporary look to me. I'm
Right.
curious to know how you
Yeah,
describe.
I use historical photographs as references, and these are real people. They're not stylized or kind of romanticized. These are real human beings with real stories. So that's my first step is I use, historical photographs and I paint them. But I use a lot of contemporary movement and style. And I think my architecture background influences kind of the hard edges. Some people said this really kind of a graphic, look to them because they're really
Yeah.
tight. They're really sharp and then some people have said pop, but I don't really see a pop aspect of it. I think it's only because they don't really know kind of what it's all about. But it's kind of hard. I mean, I have degrees in art, but I can't to kind of give it like an ism or an ist is kind of like but but yeah, I mean, and it's not something I maybe consciously did. I didn't say, okay, I'm gonna separate myself and do this, and this. It's just something that kind of developed over the years, from influences from like T.C. Cannon and James Weeks and Nathan Olivares to John Nieto. It all kind of just, because as you're kind of growing and learning and kind of putting together your own visual language, you kind of pull from all these things, because it's kind of like, there was no Stevie Ray Vaughan without Albert King or Jimi Hendrix, or there's no Aerosmith without the Rolling Stones. So it's kind of some of that. It's just kind of picking from each, and then one day it's yours. And like you said, I really love the fact that people can see it and they know whose it is. I think that really happened to me in 2006. I was on the cover of the Santa Fe magazine, and it didn't have my name or anything. It just had the image, and everybody was like, "Oh, we knew exactly whose artwork that was." And it really felt good that I kind of pulled away from my influences. They're still there, and people still recognize it, and I don't hide from it. But it's kind of like, okay, this is me. This is my language. This is my visual language, and I think from then it's really kind of taken off. So
Well, and your use of color is to me, certainly I'm not an artist nor am I an art critic, but you've done a really great job of using some surprising color that still looks like the earth and the sky.
right,
I'm, I, I
I
mean, I
just
don't know how to describe that, but
Well, I for a little while I taught color theory. So we talked about breaking down colors and what colors really are. That really they're all just red, blue, yellow, black, and white. And so, but I really play with color. I remember when I first started, a lot of people always said, "Oh, you have great colors," and I thought, well, it's just something nice to say because maybe the paintings weren't great, but the colors were nice. But over the years, being in shows and showing with other artists and kind of seeing how my colors separate. Yeah, I understand that now because I love color. I love real life color, and a lot of times I'm not taking it straight out of the tube. I'm kind of toning it down with a little bit of neutral gray or some burnt umber, or like I use a lot of Payne's gray. I always say Payne's gray is my crack. I can't get enough of it. And so I kind of use colors to just kind of bring it down a notch, even though it's like an orange or a teal or something like that. I've always kind of just brought it down a notch a little bit. And it's kind of like tuning down your guitar and to just like a lower level. And so it kind of plays really well. And it's been successful. Like I said, I've gotten a lot of recognition about the color palette, and I just really mix. I mix a lot of colors. I experiment with a lot of colors, and I play with kind of color theories of like complementary colors, but then I'll add like a little gray into it or something like that. So I'm always messing around in there with colors, and sometimes I get stuck because I'll make a color and it's hard to kind of, if I need more of it, you got to kind of reverse engineer it and kind of make that color again. So sometimes I can get caught. So
well, I want folks who are not familiar to understand what your history is. Tell our listeners who Quanah Parker was. I mean, uh, both my husband and I are huge history buffs, so that when I learned that you were a direct descendant, that was exciting to me. But I probably have somebody listening in Dubai who's like, oh, what's the big deal?
right,
I
right,
Yeah,
right.
let's hear about. I mean,
Yeah,
first there's the Comanche piece, and then there's the Quanah Parker piece. That's really
right.
fascinating.
So, the Comanches were nomadic raiders. They kind of conquered the southern plains. They moved from Idaho down and became Comanches when they got the horses here in New Mexico, because the word Comanche is Comanchia, and it's a Ute word that means those that fight us all the time. So about 1620, 1630, we got the
Wait,
horse.
wait, wait. Say that again. Those who fight us all the time? Is that what
Yeah,
you said?
yeah.
Okay.
So they earned that name, and so with Comanchia, then the Spaniards got a hold of it, came Comanche, and so so they were hell raisers and raiders and conquerors, and all these kind of wonderful things, and so they pushed in through here, and so so they really kind of took over about 1700, and so you're talking from 1620 to probably 1880. They had a run, so 260-year run of being uh, the rulers of the Southern Plains, basically. So Quanah Parker was kind of the tail end of that, and his mom was a white captive. She was captured by the Comanches when she was 9. She was raised Comanche. She grew up to marry a Comanche chief named Nocona, who was Quanah's father, and she had 3 children. And the whites or the Texans recaptured her when Quanah was about 12, and she never came back. They took her and they
Mm.
took his younger sister. Her name was Totsia Prairie Flower. So they took her, and they never came back. So Quanah and his younger brother Pecos, their father was without their mother, for that. So Quanah kind of rose up being a warrior, a leader. I'm sure he learned from his father, because just because your father wasn't chief didn't necessarily make you a chief. It's very democratic. People followed you if you were going to provide, protect, and lead. And so Quanah was a warrior. Quanah was a chief. He fought against Texas. He fought against the United States. He was considered an enemy of the state. And then finally, after wars and all this stuff, the Comanche had to surrender to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, in about 1875 was the beginning, and they all kind of trickled in slowly. And so the Comanches didn't have one big chief, but once they kind of put everybody on the reservation and all the Comanches were together, his band of Comanches, the Quahada, were had probably had the most. So even if they voted, they would probably elect him as chief. But the government kind of appointed him the overall chief. He was a very good leader, and he had vision of the future, and they probably liked him the best because he was half white. So that kind of helped politically.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you know, but anyway, but he was all Comanche. I mean, he didn't see himself as white. I mean, later on, he kind of knew and kind of used that to kind of gain some political favor. But he kind of let him in. He let him into education, ranching, and did all these things. And he was a judge, and so he did everything. I mean, he was a chief, he was a warrior, he was a diplomat. He fought for rights for Native people. He was in D.C. a lot, and so he kind of led a very interesting life. There's a few books about him. There's one very bad book called Empire of the Summer Moon. It's not such a great read, but
I think I've read that.
yeah, we're kind of at war with those guys. They're trying to make a movie out of it, but anyway, he just he had a fascinating life, and I felt like he really did a lot, for his people, and also, like I said, kind of lead and telling people, if you want us to live this life, this white man's life, well, then we need education, we need all these things, and so he went from being this kind of warrior against the United States to an advocate for this education and learning, and kind of leading us into the future.
Well, what an advantage for the Comanches at that point in time, as opposed to perhaps the way it was done here. Like when the Indian school was created, and some of the local tribes and pueblos um, fell under that without an advocate like that. Am I correct? Is that
Well, no, all tribes did. I mean, even there in Oklahoma, the Fort Sill Indian School, kids were getting taken away from their families and put into these boarding schools, and the Comanche didn't escape that. They all had to go at eventually some point. But in the beginning, it was meant well. I know they worked with the Quakers about having schools on the reservation in the beginning period, but at some point, really kind of after Quanah's time, well, even before, they were doing it in other places, but even after his time, they were removing children. The Comanches didn't escape that fate, and so their children were taken away from them and shipped off to, all over the place to, Pennsylvania. Some of them stayed there, at the Fort Sill Indian School, and so most of my family went to boarding schools, and so yeah, so they didn't escape that fate. So everybody kind of went through it. So it's just kind of the reality at the time.
I'm fascinated. So was there ever a reunion of any sort with his mother and his sister?
No, they both died. So they died. The mom just kind of gave up. The baby got sick. I'm not for sure what she had, if it was smallpox or cholera or something, but the baby got sick and she died. And then after that, they just weren't going to let her go. They just, to prove a point, they didn't want her back with the Comanches. And so she just kind of, after the baby died, she just kind of gave up. Some say she just starved herself to death, or she died of a broken heart. And so yeah, so shit, they never got back together. But he did, when she passed. At some point, he moved her grave back to Oklahoma with him, and then they're buried together in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, what they call the Chiefs Mound. So actually, they moved together. So they moved her eventually, and then and my grandfather was actually part when they reburied Quanah next to his mom. Back in the '50s, and so that was a good thing that happened then. So at least they're
That's
resting together. So
that's the story somebody should tell in a movie.
yeah,
That's heartbreaking. Um,
yeah,
well, so you are uh, you are incredibly prolific. It seems to me. I know that there are artists out there who are think how do you create this body of work? Because you seem to me to be really focused, and
right,
you create a lot. You create all day long, every day. It seems like.
yeah.
How does that
Yeah,
work?
I just clock in. When I taught at the college, or when I teach, and when I do these business of work art, I do a lot of business of art workshops. I taught the business of art at the college level, but I also do like these artist programs and workshops, and I talk about production rate. I teach, like, you got to know your production rate. Can you carry a gallery? Can you carry two galleries? Can you carry three? Can you do four shows a year? Can you do one show a year? So you really have to know your production rate. You got to know how to clock in, and you do. And I use the philosophy. I believe it was Chuck Close. He said, "Amateurs wait for inspiration. The rest of us go to work every day," and it's true.
Right.
I kind of joke that when I'm going in for a root canal, I'm hoping that my dentist isn't waiting for inspiration; that he's just ready to clock in and go to work. So I do the same thing. There are some days where it's really work, and there's some days I'm just listening to great music and drinking some cokes and having a good time. But I just get in and work, and that's what you have to do. I mean, I've got a pretty good schedule. I get up, take my son to school in the morning, drop him off, and I kind of get back around the house about 8:30. Maybe get caffeinated, watch a little bit of news or read, and then I get in the studio and I'm in there, from 9 o'clock, and he doesn't get out of practice till 5:30. So there's some days I can just put in good long days. Days where he goes to jujitsu, he's gone till 8, so I can put in a good 12-hour day, and I really try to get my work in, and also make family time, because we have cross country and track and jujitsu and all that kind of stuff. But it's just you'd be surprised, and I tell artists that you'd be surprised when you just get in and work. You can get
Oh,
in
right. Yeah.
a lot of work in 8 hours and 9 hours, and if you're not kind of messing around, or you're not doing all this other stuff. And I have to remind family and friends too that it's I'm in the office. I'm at the office. So when the son says, "Hey, Dad, can you bring my shoes over because I forgot my track shoes?" You're like, I'm in the office. It's no different. I can take a lunch break, and then I have to remind people too that I work with, committees and stuff, that these are my office hours. And I really try to keep to it, stick to it. And that's just the trick. I just get in and work. And that's how I've always done it. And I work pretty quickly. I go straight to the canvas with the paintbrush. I mean, I've been doing it so long that I've kind of cut out some, things in the middle, some of the little drawing and all the little things like that. So it's just becoming more efficient, being a pro. And I think as the more you paint stuff like that, your efficiency increases. And so it's just a matter of clocking in and having really good efficiency.
I've been reading again for about the 42nd time The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I don't know if you've ever read that, but he
Oh,
talks about how resistance is the biggest enemy of art, because and he's talking about writing and creating
right.
and all sorts of media, even creating business. And he says, if he said we have a million things in the world that can talk us out of sitting our ass in the chair. I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm sure you're not sitting down all the time, but it's really the the commitment and the time. And I know that's how it is for me. If I don't have an hour carved out every morning where I write and I create something, then I can't. It's not a matter of motivation. It's a matter of just carving out the time and doing it. And you
Right.
do it. You're a professional. You do it all day, every day. And
Right.
um, I think that's you. You're doing a podcast now, aren't you, for artists that's somewhat about the business of art?
It's a radio show at KSFR, but it's also kind of a podcast. They'll record it and people can listen to it whenever they want. Yeah, it's called The Business of Art. And I bring in a lot of artists, actors, poets, and we just kind of talk about the business side. How did you get here? What made you decide to do this? What made you take the leap? What are some of the things that propelled your career? Ups and downs, the business side of it, and not necessarily the art so much. What you're writing about, what you're
Right.
painting about, but all the other stuff. Because the premise of the show is like, people come to the reading, the poetry reading, and you're in your nice clothes and you're reading the finished product, or you're at the gallery on Friday night and you're dressed in your nice clothes and the finished product is on the wall. But what about all the other stuff that it takes um, um, to get to that point? Just even the years ahead. What did it take? Well, some of the good galleries and bad galleries and great shows and bad shows, and I almost quit, and or I was a graphic designer for 25 years and I walked away from it to be a fine art painter. So it's kind of all the other stuff. It's kind of pulling back the curtain so people can kind of see, what it takes to kind of get to that end result. And people really like it. I mean, I've gotten a lot of great emails at Indie Market. My son was laughing because a lot of people recognize me from the show. They
Oh,
saw my name and they're like, "Oh, we listened to your show." And artists like it because it's artist to artist. And so a lot of people like the fact that it's one artist asking another artist, and they love kind of the great questions and just some of the conversations. So, like for tonight, I have an artist. She's just kind of new in the game. She's having a hard time. She just got in a gallery, and then the gallery's closing, and so it's kind of just the ups and downs. So we're going to kind of talk about where she's at in her career and all those types of things. And I've talked to artists, you know, just yeah, famous artists that have been on the show and talked about their careers and the ups and downs. So yeah, so it's a fun show, and I learn a lot. I had a poet on one time, and I'm like, how do you make money being a poet? And she explained it, and it was like, oh wow. And so it's kind of cool for me to kind of learn and understand how these things work.
and you, what are you do? What's next? I know are you headed to Houston for a show? Is that
Yeah,
what's
yeah. I just spent 8 days in Wyoming at a show up there. It's a Western art and design exhibition, which was okay. It was I don't think it was run very well. But my goal was to get up there and land a gallery representation, and I did. So I got picked up by Mountain Trails Gallery, and they're out of Jackson Hole, Bozeman, and Park City, Utah, which is nice
wow?
because those are all places I'm not in. And so yeah, so it was good in that aspect that I got business done. And yes, I'm working with the Bryan Museum out of Galveston, but they're having a big fundraiser shindig art auction in Houston. And so we donate paintings, and it's a 70-30 split. And then, and those things help you cultivate more collectors. So they see you. I'm always kind of the guest. Uh, I'm the ticket, I guess. So people come and I lecture about Comanches in Texas and Quanah Parker and all that good stuff. And then we have an art auction. So yeah, so those things are nice because it helps the museum. And then I make a little bit of money and kind of spread the word, spread the gospel, and go from there. And yeah, so I have a full schedule.
And how we'll post a link to that event, just so that folks, if they're in that neck of the woods, they can find you. I have to ask, because we are talking about New Mexico, how did you end up here in particular? What?
Well, I had an uncle and aunt that lived in Albuquerque, and so we'd always come out. It's my dad's uncle, and we'd always come out. And then I was always, really close with my cousin Eric. We were about the same age. He had older brothers and older sisters, and then I was the oldest. But me and him kind of hit it off when we were kids in San Carlos, Arizona. And but my uncle and aunt lived here, so we'd come out and visit quite a bit. I always loved New Mexico, and historically, it's a Comanche place. But I just was, I was going to architecture school at the University of Oklahoma. I came out one summer to just kind of hang out and check it out, and one thing led to another. I had already had, all my credits and stuff from there, and then I spent like a semester, 2 semesters or 3 semesters at IIA. I didn't know it existed, and I thought this is kind of cool. I'm going to take some classes. Initially, I was just going to take a break from architecture school and take a semester, but I ended up taking three, and I got an associate's degree. And then I went to UNM. So I ended up kind of just staying and kind of pursuing the art. But it still took a while to kind of get going. I went to UNM and worked on my degree there, but I started working in the casino industry. But so it took a while for me to kind of finally get aligned in the art, and but I guess it happens when it's supposed to happen. So
It does. It
yeah, and
does.
I've been here since 1990. Minus 2 years. I went to Oklahoma. I've been here since 1990. So
Wow.
so
Wow.
I'm not going anywhere.
I feel the same way. I feel exactly the same. And um, there's so much more we could talk about. But I know we've used up a lot of your time. You got to get to work in like a minute. So,
Yeah,
and I do too. But Nocona, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to talk more about I mean, I know you use historical figures, but your animals are amazing. I'm just going to tell folks to go to your website, take a look at the work, and then follow this guy who I really admire, who's doing great work and also giving a lot back to his community. So thank you,
yeah,
Nocona. Oh,
yeah.
by the way,
Go
he
ahead.
donates pieces to the Cancer Foundation, which of course is my great love. So I have to give you a big shout out for being so
Yep.
generous.
And as far as the animals, I always say they're animals in my life. They're the animals that I observe. We live out here in Rancho Viejo, and there's a green belt, so we get visited by the coyotes pretty often. And it's just animals that I observe. Coyotes, ravens, buffalo. So it's kind of animals that I'm able to see and study and observe, and that's why I paint specific ones kind of all the time, and road runners, and it's the animals that kind of visit me. So yeah, so they kind of mean something to me, and it's the ones that I really notice and see all the time. So
Well, I'm coming for one of those road runners soon.
oh
So,
yeah.
okay. Thank you so much, Nocona. This was fun.
Yep, thanks for having me.